All right, good morning, everyone. I just figured I'd do a little recording for you today so you get a chance to hear what I have to say, but not actually have to be in class. So, bonus points for you today. So, what we're going to go through is a little PowerPoint slides. I'm going to post those up on Sakai for you so you'll be able to at least see what those are and what they look like. And I'm going to try to do this in a little bit different format than I've done before. So, a few things we're going to talk about today. Number one, I want to talk about the literature review. I know there's some questions on what that was going to look like, and how we can handle that. So things I want you to remember: number one, make sure you use at least 3 sources. The best papers will have a minimum of 5. It's probably going to be 4 to 5 pages. By the time we get done with it and the time we make this look really, really good, it's going to be much longer than that. Number two, make sure you don't just review the papers, actually synthesize that information. So look at what are the themes that you have in your paper, what are the themes with your topic. Go from big to little, so bring things down and make it a very narrow piece by the end. Start really large, start broad, look at exercise or sport or whatever it might be as a broad theme, and work your way on down until you get down to the point where you're looking at the psychology of golfing performers on the PGA Tour. Remember to make sure that you have a coherent flow that exists within your paper. It should make sense from one point to the next, and you want to make sure that everything has some sort of topic sentence where you follow what that entire paragraph is about. As far as writing the proposal, we're going to look at the methods section today and what that's going to look like. So we want to make sure we describe things like who did we study, what was that population, what procedures of sampling did we use, what was our recruitment process, what research design did you use, and statistical analysis. We're going to talk about that more next week, but be aware that statistical analysis is an important part of the methods section. It should be written so that anyone can understand the basic methodology and ultimately then replicate the study. Your methods section is probably going to be 4 to 5 pages to start, but you're going to miss some things, and we'll go back and correct and edit those, and you'll eventually have it be longer than that in the end. So as far as the method draft, here is what you need to know in order to make that happen. Number one, there's 5 specific areas you need to talk about, and subheadings would be really helpful. You're looking at subjects, experimental design, instruments and measures, procedures, as well as data analysis. Those are the 5 main components you want to be aware of. So let's take a look at those individual pieces. Number one, the subjects, you're looking at demographic information. So things like how many people, what's your sample size, what's the average age, what's the gender, it could be race, could be height, could be weight. There's all sorts of demographic pieces of information that may or may not be relevant for your study. In our group meetings, we'll talk a little bit more about what those things might be. You'll need to talk about your inclusion or exclusion criteria. So age, do you have a specific age range in mind? Activity level, education level, different experiences that may affect the study. So if you're trying to look at novice free throw shooters, you're probably not going to pick someone that's played varsity basketball or above. We'll talk about maybe a medical condition. So if you're looking at hypertension, for example, you need people that have hypertension as diagnosed by the American Heart Association or whatever it might be. You have to identify what sort of inclusion or exclusion pieces you're going to use. You need to talk about what your recruitment procedure is. So what are you going to do to recruit people if to be in your study? Are you going to email them? Are you going to be thinking about, hey, maybe I'll just talk to people that are randomly out on the Cougar Walk? There's a lot of different ways you go about recruiting, but you need to specify what you're planning on doing. If you have a specialized population, you may think, oh, maybe I need to be at a physical therapy clinic in order to make that happen. And then finally, what's your sampling technique? Are you doing a random assignment? Are you randomly sampling every 5th person on the Cougar Walk? What are you doing to make that happen? That's all part of the subjects category. As far as your experimental design goes, you need to include what type of research design is this? Is it a correlational? Is it between groups? Is it within groups? You need to be specific when identifying that. Some of you might even be quasi-experimental as well, so we'll see. You need to identify what are the levels of your independent variable. So if you're manipulating something at 2 levels or 3 or 4 or 5, whatever it might be, how many different sorts of controls do you have in place to manipulate that independent variable? You need to identify the dependent variable or variables. What are your outcome measures? You need to make sure that those make sense, that they actually flow logically from one to the next to the next. You also need to look at what's your timing for your data collection. When do things happen? It may be helpful to outline this and say, okay, we've got initial baseline, and then we have 4 weeks of training, We have a secondary measure. We have another 4 weeks of training, and then we have our final measure. That's an important piece to know as far as the timing of data collection. As far as your instruments and measures, you need to have direct measures. You want to say, what are the tools that are used to measure each dependent variable? So for example, if you have something you want to measure speed, maybe you're using a stopwatch, and then you're converting over 100 meters. Perhaps you're actually using a radar gun. Maybe you're looking at force output on a force plate. There's a lot of different options. If you're doing VO2 max, you want to talk about what treadmill, what metabolic cart, some of those pieces. You need to include the necessary equipment details. So you need to tell me, what brand of radar gun did you use? What metabolic cart setup did you use? What treadmill were you on? Anything that you might be utilizing that may be relevant to the study. Do I need to know that you used a Wilson's basketball? Probably not, but I do need to know if you used a 28.5 women's size or if you used a 32.5 men's size basketball, because those are important pieces to know because it changes the way the study is done. You also need to talk about the reliability and validity of the test that you're using. So number one, has this test been used in past research? If it's something you've developed for your test, the answer is no. You do want to include 1 to 2 sources in the text that justify the use of your measurement tools. Most things, so for example, if you're using a VO2 max protocol, say you're using the Bruce protocol, that's been validated a whole bunch of times. You'll be able to find plenty of articles that articulate that as such. If you want to link about something like maybe you're looking at sprint times and you want to say, hey, what about the repeated effort anaerobic sprint test? Is that reliable and valid? Well, yeah, you're going to find some data out there on that as well. Make sure you cite your sources that you use for this particular piece. When you get to the end of it, make sure that you don't try to reinvent the wheel. If something's been done before, use it. Don't try to make up all brand new things. That's one, a lot of work, and two, a whole lot of time. Within this idea, you might also be using some survey data. I don't think too many of you are, but with those, they're more of indirect measures. So we don't directly measure something from someone. We're actually having them fill out some information and we're measuring it that way. So make sure you include in the instruments section, what are the names of the question or questionnaires? How many items are on this particular one? Because there's short form and long form of different things. So there's the International Physical Activity Questionnaire, for example, or IPAC as it's referred to. There's a short form and there's a long form. The short form is 7 questions, the long form is 78. Big difference. We need to know which one you're using. We need to know what's the rating scale. So if it's a 1 to 5 point Likert scale, Likert, those are typically, okay, strongly agree to strongly disagree. Those sorts of scales are important to know. You also need to tell us, how do you score this thing? Do you just add up the sum of all of the numbers and do you average it? Or are there some items that are reverse scored? So if you fill out a 5, it's actually only worth 1 point. So you need to make sure you include your scale or measure in the appendix section of your paper. And again, talk about how this has been used in previous research. Does it used in this population, or are you just kind of taking something from a different population and trying to apply it to your study? The big section for this entire methods piece will be the procedures piece. This is where you need to be incredibly detailed. So if you're not a details person, this is going to be hard. It's going to be a struggle, but it's one of the most important pieces you're going to be doing. You need to tell me exactly what are the participants going to do, how is that data going to be obtained, and what is the sequence that's going to happen. So I strongly recommend making sure that you actually put together an outline that details exactly what you do. Generally, when I do this for my studies, I get between 15 to 20 steps. So there's a lot of things that need to happen. So chronologically, what's happening? If you have multiple lab visits, what's happening at each lab visit? So it just depends on kind of how you're set up, but there may be some pieces that are going to be a little bit longer. If you have instructions that you give to the participants, so for example, if they've never done a Stroop test before, you have to identify and say, these are the instructions that go with a Stroop test. That will be placed in your appendix, but make sure that you reference that there's instructions for the Stroop test in the appendix. One of the most important things that you need to state in your paper, you need to, in this procedure section, say that all procedures were approved by the IRB. So make sure that line is in there. If that line is not in there, you can easily guess that you're going to be spending or sorry, losing at least 15 to 20 points for that. So it's a big chunk, is an important piece, because if you don't have that in there, it basically says that you're doing unauthorized research, which is a big fat no-no. So with that, what about data analysis? So I don't expect you to know the nuances of data analysis. We're going to talk about that later on in class, but I want you to get started on this methods section because we want to make sure that we can get things done and have the chance to edit and revise, so that we have the best possible paper by the end of the semester. After all, people like A's. People don't like F's. I don't like to give them. People don't like to receive them. So let's get good grades on these things. So you need to identify how will your data be used to answer your research question. So you need to, number one, identify the analysis that matches your study's design. You might not know that just yet, but you might have an idea. We're going to talk about that in our group meetings next week, so be ready and at least have thought about it, even if you don't know the answer. You should be thinking about, okay, well, we've got this data, and this is what we want to do. I can help you fill in the details on what those testing pieces might be. You need to talk about in the analysis section about why is this the actual appropriate data analysis technique to be used. Now, again, I'll help you out with that piece, so don't freak out here. I want you to be aware of what's going to happen. Number three, you need to explain what that statistical test does. Does it evaluate a relationship? Does it compare means between groups? Does it compare means within groups, i.e. at different time points? So if you're saying I have time 1 and time 2, you're probably using a within groups design. Or does it make comparisons between multiple groups? So if you have 3 or 4 groups, does that what happens? Those are going to be different tests. That's okay. And then finally, you need to discuss how are you going to interpret this particular statistic. For example, if an ANOVA will be used to determine the experimental group performed significantly better or worse than the control group with respect to variable X. You may have multiple comparisons and different sorts of analyses happening. That's okay, but be aware that you're probably going to have multiple interpretation points then in this section as well, which does help you have a longer paper so that some of you might be like, oh, that's not a bad thing. The important things about the methods section that you need to know, it's due in class on November 12. I repeat, it is due on November 12. I only want the methods section. I don't need your literature review. I don't need your introduction. I don't need anything else but the methods section. I need the citations for the methods section, no other citations. So I only want the methods section. Hopefully that's pretty clear at this point. Don't submit anything else. The PowerPoint that's posted on Sakai for this little mini lecture today has a link available for you and your group to sign up for a slot. There are 4 slots available for next week on Tuesday, 4 slots available for next week on Thursday. That's 8 total slots. I think that's enough relative to the number of groups that we have. If not, I can adjust and make some things work. But make sure that you sign up as soon as possible. Don't email me on Thursday at 1:50 p.m. Oh, we forgot to sign up. And I'll say, too bad. Make sure you do your things. You're big grown-ups now, so make sure you can handle that stuff. Anyways, as for me, I'm off to my grown-up duties of doing jury duty. So hopefully I will be out by next Tuesday. Things are moving fast enough that I don't think that's too optimistic. But if not, we may have to reschedule those pieces as well. So as for now, I'm signing off. Have a great day. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you guys next week.